I wish you bluebirds in the spring to hear your song, a song to sing, and then a kiss. More than this, I wish you love.
Welcome to the Forgiveness Solution Podcast. I'm your host, Reverend Misty Tyme, and I can't tell you how excited I am to be here today. First of all, if you want to get a hold of me, you can find me at revmisty.com. Also, right here on the Sacred Stories podcast stream, you can find not just my amazing Forgiveness Solution podcast, but other inspiring podcasts just waiting for you to listen to. Well, today on the Forgiveness Solution, I'm so excited. We are interviewing somebody near and dear to my heart, Pam Burton. She's not only a coach and a social worker and has amazing life experience, but she also understands pleasers. Now, how many out there are pleasers? I know that I am a recovering pleaser. I relapse often, and I can't wait for Pam to talk about that. Also, Pam's going to talk about forgiveness because we are the Forgiveness Solution podcast right here. And we want to talk about forgiveness both in her personal life and in her professional life. I saw Pam speak about a year ago in San Diego, and I was so moved by her personal story. Pam, can you say hello to everyone?
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much.
So, well, I'm just pleased as punch and tickled down to my toes that you're here with me today and that you can share your story, because I think your story is so personal but also, worldwide. As in, we all struggle with family stuff. We all struggle with where we fit in life. And that's really what I got from your talk. And let's start from the beginning. First of all, let's talk about what you do for a living.
Well, first, let me just say what an honor and pleasure it is to be with you. I totally love and respect you and the work that you do, and really am just grateful to be here with you today.
Oh, thank you so much.
I wanted to say that. What the work I do in the world, I do life coaching.
And I think sometimes people are confused about coaching, like the different types, because you have studied with so many transformational leaders. What's the difference? Because I talk about coaching a lot in my book, too. I talk about therapy, I talk about life coaching, that kind of thing. So could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, the best, and one of my favorite examples is one that I got from my mentor. And she said one time, she said, because I've done therapy, I've been a therapist before. She said the difference between therapy and coaching is that therapy is about solving problems and coaching is about creating a life. And when I heard that, I was like, yes, I love that,
really
right?
Beautiful.
About helping people create that life that they absolutely love, and they get to define what that is. There's no standard for what that looks like other than what an individual's desires and dreams and hopes and wishes are.
Wow, that's a beautiful way to put that. I talk about therapy in my book because, a lot of very intelligent, very well-educated therapists got me to this point right now. And
me too.
Right. And so I've also done the coaching piece, and I love that piece because it's about moving forward, not just looking back.
Absolutely.
And I love
Absolutely.
That. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, I tell people the only reason we look back is to move forward, right? So sometimes it helps to take a peek back so that we can keep moving forward. So I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about your personal story, if you don't mind. Can you share with the listeners? Of course, it's one listener at a time, so that person is just with us right now. Can you talk about your personal story, because it resonates with so many?
Yeah. I was thinking about that earlier today, and I was like, there's so many like twists and turns and little minor mini stories within the story that we all have, right?
Right.
But my story starts with me. I was born in Georgia, born in the same town in the hospital as my grandmother and my mother. And I lived in a small town called Americus, Georgia, until I was about 7 years old. And about a mile down the street, literally, was where my grandmother lived from where we were. And my grandmother, this was my mom's mom, was like the sun and the moon. I mean, she was like the light of my life. I loved my grandmother. And so she was super, super special to me. So I lived there until I was about 7. And then when just after I turned 7, that following summer, we moved to Florida. And in a lot of ways, I was devastated because that meant moving away from my grandmother, from being a mile down the road to hours and hours away. It felt like eternity, compared to my young life. And so we moved to Florida. We lived there for a year. And I think really that, like missing my grandmother she's such a key and essential part of my story. But then, right after that is where I think things begin to shift and change for me as a young child. And so when we lived in Florida, that's really my first and my earliest memory of my brother who sexually abused me. And so it started, I guess I was in the second grade because I was in first grade in Florida. In Georgia. Yeah, so it started in the second grade. And, this was I'm 50, so this was years ago, right? We didn't have language for what was going on. We didn't have programs, and, nobody talked about these things. So I didn't, I'm 7, 8 years old. I don't really know what's happening or really fully even understanding it. And it wasn't until later after I graduated from college that I actually had a name for what happened to me. Mm. And that alone kind of set off my own journey that we'll talk about in terms of forgiveness. So that's happening, that's going on. And then we lived in Florida for a year, and then we moved to North Carolina, where I lived from the time I was in the third grade till I graduated from high school. And on about, I guess I was in the seventh grade. It was right before I was going to be a teenager, that magical time. I thought being a teenager would be the greatest thing. And I think really mainly, I think I've said this before, you probably heard me say this, is because it would be the first time I didn't have to order off the kids menu. It's like when you don't have to order off the kids menu, you've arrived, right? Because you have so many options and choices and stuff. But some months prior to that, my grandmother had been ill and was in the hospital. And I remember it was around Christmas time that year, and it was right after Christmas. And I remember one of the hardest moments for me was waking up and hearing the sound of my mother screaming and crying at the top of her lungs.
Oh, heartbreaking.
Yeah, and I immediately obviously knew something was wrong and found out that, my grandmother had taken a turn for the worse. She'd been in the hospital since Thanksgiving, hadn't been out, and Thanksgiving was actually the last time I saw her. And so we go to Georgia, back to my hometown where my grandmother still was, and a matter of less than a week later, I'll never forget it, the moment, it's just etched in my brain that my dad walked up these wooden stairs. My grandmother had this attic that had these wooden stairs, and it was early in the morning, and he walked up, and I immediately knew what he was going to say before he opened his mouth. And that was that your grandmother died this morning. And it was probably, again, one of those pivotal moments for me, one of the hardest times. At that point in my life, I really felt like that my grandmother was the only person who loved me. Oh. My dad worked a lot. My mom she was there, but she was physically there, but not emotionally there. And, sometimes mother-daughter relationships aren't the greatest until you get old enough to know better.
Yes, I have a daughter.
To learn, and then, when you get wiser, you really begin to love and appreciate your mom more. But, we didn't have the greatest relationships. So my grandmother was the person that, in her embrace that I truly, truly felt love. I'm experiencing sexual abuse from my brother. My dad's working. My mom's kind of not emotionally there. And so it was devastating. And I really, I guess in some ways I'd have to say I had to navigate that process, which I didn't really navigate for quite some time alone because, my mom's dealing with her own grief of losing her mother. My dad's taking care of my mom, and, nobody's, saying, how are you doing? Are you okay? And
I think that's a common problem in families when there's grief. Lots of times we don't know how to relate to children in grief. It's an area I've worked a lot in my life with hospice and different things. And we forget that the children are having the pain, and now they need breaks, they need to play, but to be able to talk to them, and I'm the same age as you, and so back then we really didn't pay attention. Now, luckily, there's a little bit more awareness, but, being that child in pain, having family issues, the adults are dealing with grief, and these adults might not have even had this kind of grief ever before in their life. So they're like don't know how to function in their own life, more or less help other people like their children.
Absolutely. I think it's just survival mode at that point, trying to deal with that. And yeah, so I, really kind of grew up kind of just going inward. And, I kept my emotions to myself. I protected myself. I built walls around myself and really kind of kept people out, and didn't trust a whole lot, very, very few people. So that was a really, really hard time. So, and I'm thinking like, the bigger moments of my life. And I think that the other one is that, fast forward, I haven't, I've experienced sexual abuse. I haven't dealt with the grief of my grandmother. And then when I was a teenager, of course, teenage time exploration, and you've lived through that many times over, so you totally know that. And I realized that, or at least I thought, at that time I was just so confused that I was gay and I was attracted to women. And long story short, essentially my mom found out, and she kind of had her suspicions based on something that had happened like the night before. And I remember coming home from school, and she sat me down at the table and she said, "You're not moving until we talk." And I knew I was in trouble, because like my mom never just wanted to sit down and talk to me, much less say I wasn't moving and you can't go to basketball practice, you can't go anywhere. And so she asked me, kind of in her, my mother is, I love my mother, and she is like so like epitome of like a Southern woman. And so she doesn't always call things what they are. And so she kind of talks around things. And so she asked me the question, "You don't want to be like that, do you?" And I knew exactly what she was talking about. And I didn't answer her. I just sat there. I think part because like I was pretty quiet in general. I wasn't very verbally expressive with my feelings. I like to write, but I wasn't verbally expressive. And maybe the other part, like I just didn't even know the answer. And my mother like flew into a rage. She was so upset, and all the things that were going on with her at the time. And ultimately she, we kind of were in this little bit of a scuffle, and she was screaming and crying. And the thing that like is etched in my memory the most is that she picked up her car keys, and as she's screaming and crying, she walks out the door, and she told me that she told herself that she would commit suicide if she ever had a child like that. And then she walks out the door.
Wow.
And of course
that moment, I mean, that's such a powerful, etched on your heart, your soul, your mind moment.
Yeah.
And it's, we'll definitely talk about that moment and where forgiveness comes in, and understanding where she's coming from. You've already said it, a Southern woman who has kind of learned how to walk around things and not address them. And first of all, let me just tell you how sorry I am for you for that moment. I wish that moment had not happened in your life.
Thank you. Well, it's interesting. Like going back, I wish that moment hadn't happened, and maybe other things had happened. And, I think this, plays into what we're talking about of, like, if that hadn't have happened, then there's some things that may not have happened for me that came as a result of that, which ultimately, was some good that came from that.
Well, I love to talk about life on this podcast, because what you just said is so true. It's kind of like being in the Grand Canyon, right? When you're going down the Grand Canyon on a donkey, you can see the walls on each side. You can see that they're pretty. You can see the river. But until you fly over the Grand Canyon and see how it's all unbelievably connected, you cannot see where the good moments, the bad moments all connect and make such a beautiful story, which is exactly what you're talking about, your story, and that we all have that. It doesn't mean that those bad moments for sure aren't still heartbreaking if you concentrated on that and didn't see the beauty over long term. Unfortunately, it does take a while to get to that long term, right?
Right. Yeah. It took me years. Decades, probably. But I got there.
And how did you get there?
How did I get there? I think, well, I had some really great therapists along the way as well. And I think several things for me. In terms of like my family and my parents, one of the things was recognizing and I don't even remember, but I just remember this moment where like I just had this innate understanding that like they did the very best that they could. And that they didn't have a manual. There weren't manuals on the right things to do for kids to help them grow up. They grew up in a different time. And I really just came to believe and accept that they did the very best that they knew how. And that was a really good starting point for me to work in terms of forgiveness. Because, if somebody's doing the best that they know how to do, then how can you be upset and angry with them? Because they just didn't know better.
And there's a lot of that. It's about expectations, right? We might have an expectation and they don't live up to it. So they might not have the will or the skill to live up to your expectation.
Exactly.
And sometimes we have to look at that. Now, I'm sure your mom had the will. She wanted to be the best mom she could. Excuse me. But did she have the skill? And parental stuff kind of rolls downhill, doesn't it? So we don't know what she was influenced by, what her situation was. You had an amazing grandmother, and we all change over time, but we don't know what her pivotal moments were. They could have been parental related, another family related, her life experience, all that. But it's hard to think about your mom as a real human being. She's supposed to be your mom.
Right. Yeah, and it took me a really long time to get there and to say exactly what you said, which is so beautiful, right? It's like, this is a human being, and she's had things that she's experienced in her life that shaped and formed her and made her the way she was. My grandmother was amazing with me. Like, I loved her, but, like, that's what grandmother was supposed to do, right? That doesn't mean her relationship with my mom didn't come with its own challenges and, expectations and things like that, the pressures that my mom had. I just was fortunate enough not to have those. But, yeah, my mom had those things. And I don't even know the extent. I know some of my mom's story, but I don't even know the extent of it. But I do know that does influence a person in who they're able to be with you and those expectations that you were talking about. So, yeah, my mom was, in retrospect, I learned wonderful things from my mom. And my mom was a great mom in a lot of ways. And, there were a lot of ways that I didn't get the things that I needed. But the gift in that for me was that I learned how to get those myself. And if I'd had them, if I'd had that acceptance, and I think this is probably one of the biggest gifts for me. And Steve Jobs once said, and this is one of my favorite quotes, is that you can't connect the dots looking forward, that you can only connect the dots looking backwards.
Exactly.
And looking back over those dots, and one of those dots was that really difficult moment with my mom, was that it gave me the opportunity over time to really learn how to love myself and accept myself for who I was, which I struggled with for well over a decade. Really hating myself and not liking who I was and feeling, full of shame and, like I was an embarrassment to my family and all kinds of things. But if I'd not had that, I don't know that I would have gotten to the places that I've gotten. And so, looking back, I can not wish that situation necessarily on anybody, but be grateful for the gifts that it brought me and gave me.
And because of those experiences, you've become such a warm, caring, wonderful social worker, life coach, all those things. And you are sharing a story that so many can relate to. So many can relate to not feeling accepted by the people that are supposed to love them the most, their parents.
Right.
Absolutely. Tell me about your time with your mom now, because we've moved forward. We know that you found the love that you needed that makes your life full and amazing, but how do you reconcile those relationships?
Well, my relationship with my mom is, I would say, really good. Is it what I would absolutely love? No, because of those expectations and the things that I desire that are difficult and sometimes uncomfortable for her. I am an introvert by nature, so I like to have deep and meaningful conversations. And my mom can go there sometimes, but she, my mom is, we talk about what's happening, on kind of maybe not quite the surface level, a little bit deeper, but I have just come to love and appreciate and respect her. And, I recognize in the whole process of I wanted her to accept me for who I was. Then I needed to accept her for who she is, her beliefs, the way she is. And so I've really come to love and appreciate who she is and really form kind of a new relationship based on that type of acceptance of her and saying, okay, this is my mom. How is she? And how can I accept her? And how can we navigate this relationship in a way that works? So that's kind of what I've done.
And forgiveness is there, right, with that acceptance?
Absolutely. Oh, right. Absolutely. I don't know that without forgiveness that there could be that acceptance, right? Because I would still be wanting them, my mom and my dad both, to be something that they're not, or to believe things that they don't. We have different views and beliefs, and we don't see eye to eye, and that's okay because I can love and respect them for where they are, and I can have my own values and beliefs. For a long time, I thought in order to be worthy or deserving that I had to have that approval from both my parents, and then just recognizing, no, I need that approval from myself, because when I have it from me, I don't need it from anybody else. So I can accept and love other people for where they are, and that certainly includes both my parents. And so so we've been able to mend and heal that relationship.
My favorite comment is my favorite little tagline, which is forgiveness really is the link between love and healing. Because we can love someone, but we can still be really angry at them and not respect them and not feel that they're coming from a decent point of view and they're wrong. But really, forgiveness lets you link that, because you can still love someone and not agree with them. You can still love them and not have the same views in life and all of that. And you can also, and you said it perfectly, you can forgive them for their own belief systems, where they've come from, all of that. And with forgiveness, that tool, that wonderful tool we've been giving, that we didn't even realize we had in our toolbox for a long time, because it's really confused what forgiveness is, right? Forgiveness doesn't mean that you condone their behavior. It doesn't mean that you believe the same way they do. That also people tend to have consequences for bad action. So if somebody was terrible to you, you have the right to have healthy boundaries and that kind of thing. But you can still love them. I say love them with a 10-foot pole.
Yes. Right. I love that. I had this really struggle when I was younger around forgiveness and what did forgiveness mean? I needed you decades ago. Totally. I'm glad people have you now. I struggle because I could still remember the things that happened to me. And one day, I can't even remember which place it was, but I was sitting in a church, and I heard a minister say, and this is what shifted things for me around forgiveness, is that forgiveness is remembering without hate. Now, I don't love that word hate, but it's remembering without all that emotional energy attached to it. You're not that negative energy. And so I can recall and talk about these moments because of forgiveness, and I don't have that emotional energy. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, okay, I can do that. Because, for a long time I heard forgive and forget. And I'm like, how do you forget? I don't know how to do that, right?
I've never met anyone. I've never met anyone. And I have actually worked with 2 physicians that had their children murdered. And I have never, ever met anyone who's had something terrible happen to them and then just plain old forget about it.
Right?
Forgiveness is not forgetting. Yeah, right. I love that. Forgiveness is remembering without all that. We can change the word from hate to expectations, anger, sadness. Yeah. It's like separating. It's like taking a deep breath and letting out the pain and stepping back.
Yeah, Yeah. And then you're in this place of neutrality, so you can remember the situation, which I can recall, but I don't feel those emotions anymore.
And can we touch on your relationship with your brother now?
Yeah. You know what? I love my brother. I have what I would call a good relationship with my brother, probably the 10-foot pole sometimes. I hope he doesn't hear this because I don't care if he does or not. But he, oh, man, I was able to, work through that process of forgiveness with him because of what you talked about earlier, in that I could recognize and understand the pain that he was in as a child, and he didn't know what he was doing. You know what I mean? He was acting out of his own pain. And so I've been able to move into this place of forgiveness. And one of the greatest, I think, pains in my heart is that he's never been able to forgive himself. And so that 10-foot pole for me is my time around him or talking to him is limited because he just can't let go. As much as I say, I've forgiven you, and like the greatest gift you can give to me is to forgive yourself.
Right.
He struggles with it, and he still uses it to punish himself and, all the bad things that he's done or feels like he's done. And so it's really hard to be in that kind of energy for a long period of time. So I can be in it sometimes, but I love him, and he's funny, and when he's not in that negative place, like we really have a great and beautiful connection. We have a lot to say. He felt the same way about my grandmother, so we have a lot of connection points, but the disconnect point for me is just the energy of the pain that he refuses to let go of, even though,
And you brought this up earlier, the shame game. How we shame, we blame, then we feel shame, and so self-forgiveness helps you remove the shame by learning from it and moving on and knowing you're not planning on repeating it. And I wish that for your brother.
Me too. Yeah. If anything, I wish that for him, because it's such a freedom when you can learn to let go and forgive yourself.
Right. Well, now in your current work, and I love your links, they're all they have such great names. Kickstartwithheart.com is where everyone would find you. And I just love that. But you talk about pleasers. And did you come, and I'm a recovering pleaser myself. So talk to us a little bit about that work you do.
Okay. Well, I love that you use the word recovery, because there was a point where I said I'm a reformed pleaser, and then I had this light bulb of no, you're not reformed, you're in recovery, because there's always that chance of relapse.
There's relapse.
Right?
There's so much relapse.
Relapse happens, right? I spent a lot of years working in addiction, so I know about relapse. And I'm I'm recovering. Super recovering pleaser. I'm sorry, I got sidetracked. What would you tell me your question again?
Mine was just talk about your work with other pleasers, and because you also have a free download on your website, which is great. So I recommend that everybody pop on over to Kickstart with a Heart, because there's a wonderful download, a gift for you about not being a pleaser, about how to fix it. And
I call it the ultimate guide to stop pleasing everyone around you. And a lot of people that are pleasers live in a place of frustration and overwhelm, and we get frustrated and overwhelmed because we say yes to way too many things for other people and not enough yeses to ourselves, right? So every time we say yes to one thing, we say no to hundreds of other things. And so the guide, one of the things I love about the guide and really helping walk people through is using that old word that, it's nobody loves it, but it's boundaries. How do you begin to set boundaries?
Sweetie, boundaries aren't a bad thing. It's like a
They're not a bad thing.
No, the fence you put around your life that has a gate. You can choose to let anybody you want in or out that gate.
Absolutely. But you put that fence around. I love it. Yes. So those boundaries, right? And in the guide, there are 5 different questions that really help. If you sit and you really ask yourself these questions, it really helps you to get really clear on what it is that you're passionate about, right? Because, as a recovering pleaser, I say that, we have this pattern of like yes comes out of our mouth before there's even a thought. Somebody starts talking and like our immediate reaction is yes. Like, will you? And it's like yes before we even know what it is. It's just so odd. It can be so automatic because we're givers, we're kind, we're compassionate people, and so we like to help and support. But we go overboard, right? And that becomes into the realm of pleasing. So really about putting that fence around those questions and saying, okay, how can you start to begin to say yes essentially to you? What is your authentic yes? And sometimes that means saying no and really starting to practice saying no when the opportunity is not something that you're super excited about. You feel, I'm really big around guilt, obligation, and should. Those are like, do not, never say no to something you feel guilty about, that you feel like you should do, or you feel obligated to do, right? Nobody wants to owe anybody anything,
right.
Emotionally, physically, financially, or whatever. And so there's some questions in there that kind of help guide you to get you to like, what is it for you? Like, take everybody else off the table. What do you want here? Do you want to go to the movies with that friend? Do you want to work on that project? Do you want to sit on that board? Whatever that is, so that you can get really clear. And so when you're saying yes, you're making sure that you're saying yes to things that are in alignment with your vision, your goals, and your values.
And when you're
because
in
a lot
alignment,
of times we say yes.
Yeah. When you're in alignment and you really do want to do something, you're all in. You're like, I'm all in. But if you aren't in alignment and you say yes anyways, we've all done that. We begrudgingly show up.
Yes. And that has a tendency. One of the things I recognize in, some of the folks that I get to work with is that when they say yes, when they really want to say no, is that it builds up resentment. And ultimately they're resentful toward the other person, but I say ultimately we're really angry and upset with ourselves because we're not giving the answer that we really, really want to give and honoring ourselves in that way.
Oh, that is so true. Well, Pam, it's been such a pleasure to have you today and be able to talk to you about real life family stuff, that gunky stuff. We all have it. There's no perfect family. And then also the grief but the love from your grandmother, and then the grief that comes with it, and then everything else about the will and the skill to meet everybody's expectations and how we try to please everybody. You're just yummy, and I can't thank you enough for sharing your personal story, also what you do for a living, and thank goodness that you were able to take those nuggets, and I happen to know she loves nuggets, of beautifulness, and make it a mission in your life. And it's just a pleasure to know you, and I'm just honored that you were able to share it with us today.
Well, it's been an honor and pleasure to be with you, as always, Reverend Misty.
And also, you can find Rev Misty at revmisty.com. And I have exciting news. My book, The Forgiveness Solution, a step-by-step process to let it go, is ready for you to order. You can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, also right on sacredstories.com. So thanks for joining us today, and have a blessed day.
I wish you bluebirds in the spring to hear your song, a song to sing, and then a kiss. More than this, I wish you love.